الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له أشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. أما بعد, today is 12th of Ramadan. We continue the Sira of the Prophet Sallam. So we left it yesterday in specifying that Laylatul Qadr can be any one of the last 10 nights. It's going to be on odd nights if the month has 29 days, or even nights if the month has 30 days, as Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah explained. And we don't know whether the month has 29 or 30 days, so we have to do enough effort in the last 10 days so that we are sure to witness Laylatul Qadr whenever it is in the last 10 nights. So here the writer says the first of initiation of revelation for Allah's Messenger ﷺ assumed the form of true dreams, as we saw yesterday. He said 6 months out of 23 years. It's one part of 46 parts. That's the meaning of the hadith. After that, seclusion became clear to, or became dear to the Prophet ﷺ. He liked being alone. And he would go to Cave Hira to engage in what's called tahannuth. Tahannuth is devotion. Tahannuth in Arabic is devotion in English. So he would do that for a certain number of nights until he would run out of food and water and return to his family, and then pick up more provisions and then go back to the cave of Hira. Unexpectedly, the truth came to him ﷺ while he was in the cave of Hira. The archangel Jibreel ﷺ came to him and said, recite. So Jibreel ﷺ came to the Prophet ﷺ in cave Hira and told him, recite. He ﷺ said, I cannot recite. So he, Muhammad ﷺ, said, as he described ﷺ in a hadith, he says, then he took me and embraced me tightly. So Jibreel ﷺ took the Prophet ﷺ and squeezed him. And then he let him go and he said, recite. The Prophet ﷺ said, I cannot recite because he was illiterate. The Prophet ﷺ was illiterate. He was not able to read or write, and this is by design. This is by design. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, on purpose, made the Prophet ﷺ be illiterate. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَمَا كُنْتَ تَتْلُو مِنْ قَبْلِهِ مِنْ كِتَابٍ وَلَا تَخُطُّهُ بِيَمِينِكَ إِذًا لَارْتَابَ الْمُبْطِلُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, because as we said, he challenged the Arabs, who are eloquent speakers, to produce a Quran from the Arabic letters that they know so well, the same way the Quran is from Arabic letters. In addition to that, Muhammad ﷺ was not a poet before. He could not do poetry, alayhi salatu wasalam. وَمَا عَلَّمْنَاهُ الشِّعْرَ وَمَا يَنْبَغِي لَهُ. Prophet ﷺ could not say poetry. So that number one, he's illiterate. He could not say poetry, so how can he come up with the Quran? So it's not from him. This is further proof that the Quran is not from Muhammad ﷺ. That's why when the companions used to dig the trench for the Battle of Khandaq, when the mushriks joined forces to come and annihilate the few Muslims that were in Medina, the same way the mushriks are and the hypocrites are doing today to our brothers in Palestine. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give them victory. So the companions, they were digging a trench so that they can stop the army from reaching Medina. And they would do irtijal, like a poetry. They would say, Allahumma la aisha illa aishul akhirah, faghfir lil ansari wal muhajirah. Oh Allah, the true life is the life of the hereafter. So forgive the ansar and the muhajirin. Ansar wal muhajirah, so it rhymes. But the Prophet ﷺ said, Allahumma la aisha illa aishul akhirah, faghfir lil muhajirin wal ansar. So he could not do it like. So by design, he was not a poet. He would not be able to say poetry. So that's why Jibreel alayhi salam, when he told him to recite, he also said, "Ma ana biqari." I'm not a literate person. I cannot recite. So Jibreel embraced him tightly and did that 3 times. And then finally, Jibreel alayhi salam said, "Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq, khalaqa al-insana min 'alaq, iqra wa rabbuka al-akram." Read in the name of your Lord, who has created all that exists, has created man from a clot, which is a piece of thick coagulated blood. You know, when the sperm meets with the egg, fertilizes the egg, then after that it becomes like a leech. Read, and your Lord is the most generous. So here the first revelation to Muhammad ﷺ was to read, to gain knowledge. Okay, so this tells you how important knowledge is in our religion. Of course, the religious knowledge goes first, and then after that comes the dunya knowledge. That's why all of the Salaf of this ummah, basically, they would learn the religion first. They would learn the Quran, they would learn the Hadith, and then they would go do some worldly trade. Like Ibn Sina, you know, even though he was a mulhid, but you know, anyways, he's attributed to the Muslims, became a doctor, a surgeon at 17 years old, right? There's Al-Khawarizmi, algorithm. Algorithm is Al-Khawarizmi. He's the father of algebra. He was a Muslim. There is Ibn Rushd. Of course, they changed the names, and it may not sound Arabic when you see it. So all these people were actually were scholars, experts at their fields, and actually I was surprised to hear the current UN Secretary General mentioning this. The UN Secretary General is saying that, you know, Islam has brought light to this world, that the European civilization was built, you know, from what they obtained from Muslim. I mean, this is the UN Secretary General, and as they said, the truth is what the enemy is witness to. Okay, so basically he's telling them, you people that are demonizing the Muslims, these people contributed so much to the current civilization. Actually, even Ibn Sina has the law of medicine called Al-Qanun. In English, it's called the canon. It's actually being taught until today in Western universities, right? But of course, what happened is that after the, you know, at the end of the Crusades, when the Christians finally were able to defeat the Muslims and they occupied the Muslim land, they brainwashed us. They made us forget who we are. They made us love everything about them. They became the new masters. They became the innovators of everything that's good. They brainwashed us. And that's why if you go to the school curricula in Muslim countries, they don't teach you much about who we are as Muslims. They teach you about Napoleon Bonaparte, about his wars, about this. So basically, we don't know who we are. So that's why it behooves us as Muslims to, number one, know who we are. Number two, teach our children who we are. Because if you are defeated mentally and emotionally, you're never going to move forward. If we're always defeated, we always think that the West is much more advanced than us, we're never going to be able to do any good to this religion or to this ummah. So we have to know who we really are and teach that to our children and let them carry on after us. Okay? Because change comes after generations. This is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when the children of Israel who lived under slavery for so long were not able to wage jihad for the sake of Allah and fight the Palestinians that at the time, as we said, used to worship statues, those people were not able to fight jihad with them. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala caused them to be lost in the desert for 4 years. 4 years. Why? The scholar said so that all of that generation that lived under the slavery of Fir'aun and the Egyptians would die because their hearts are too weak. They're not going to be able to fight for the sake of Allah. And a new generation that grew up in the desert in the freedom were the ones that were able to finally conquer Jerusalem with the Prophet Yusha. Of course, they were evildoers themselves, as Allah tells us in the Quran, that after they conquered, then instead of thanking Allah and their Prophet told them, "Udkhulu baba sujjada," that means enter the holy city of Jerusalem, prostrate to your Lord, because He delivered this blessed land to you, because they were the Muslims at the time. Instead of prostrating on their heads, they actually sat on their backs and started crawling backwards on their backs toward the city and laughing. So making fun from the instructions, making fun of the instructions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَأَنزَلْنَا عَلَى الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا رِجْزًا مِنَ السَّمَاءِ. This is something we read all the time, but maybe not many people know the meaning of it. So Allah punished those people because they did that. So back to our point is that the first verse that was revealed to this ummah is Iqra. But of course, first knowledge that we should seek is the knowledge of the hereafter. Why? Because the knowledge of the hereafter serves you and helps you in this dunya and in the hereafter. The worldly knowledge, you only eat with it. It's only food that you eat. Understand? So if you have to choose one or the other, you choose the religious knowledge. But of course, the best is to combine between the two. This is who we are as an ummah. We are scholars in the religion and scholars in the worldly matters. Like Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah was a doctor. And people don't know that Ibn al-Qayyim was a doctor. So, you know, it's not something that... my dear brother, the lesson is ongoing. Please, if you can recite without... okay. You know, there's a hadith, right? Let me tell you the hadith, right? There were some... you know, so we can learn something. There were companions reciting the Quran. Each one reciting the Quran loudly. So the Prophet ﷺ said, don't harm each other with the Quran. This is reciting the Quran with other people. So here there is a lesson. Many brothers, mashallah, they are paying attention. Jazakallah khair. Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put it in your mizan of good deeds. Huh? بالعربي؟ اوكي. كان بعض الصحابة رضي الله عنهم يقرؤون القرآن جهرا فطلع عليهم الرسول عليه الصلاة والسلام قال لا تأذوا بعضكم البعض بالقرآن لأن الواحد يقرأ القرآن ويزعج الآخر فجزاكم الله خير وإياك. So read. This is the first thing. That's why, as we said, we have to gain knowledge of the religion and the dunya. So the Prophet ﷺ repeated these verses, and he was trembling with fear, ﷺ, because he was normal. He was a normal human being, right? He did not know what was in store for him, that he's the best of mankind, etc., right? So at this stage, he came back to his wife Khadija, radiallahu anha, and he said, cover me, zammiluni, zammiluni. He was afraid. He was afraid that maybe he met a jinn or something, right? So they covered him ﷺ until he restored security. Then he informed Khadija radiallahu anha of the incident of what happened in the cave and added that he was frightened. So his wife radiallahu anha tried to soothe him and reassured him, saying, Allah will never disgrace you. So subhanAllah, this is one of the wisdoms why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave the Prophet ﷺ a woman who's older than him, who was wise, because she's going to be the first one that he's going to go to for help, and she's going to console him. This is what a good wife does. So, you know, in Islam, we hold our women dear to us. This is why we tell them, don't do this, don't do that, because we love them. Our women, they are like the jewel that has to remain always protected and covered, away from the filth that everybody's hand has, you know. Imagine if you have a jewel and everyone is touching it. How is that going to be? It's not going to be pure, right? So our women, we want them to be pure. This is why Allah gave them the best kind of life. Don't do this, don't do that. You have to cover yourself when you're outside. So people can know that, you know, they are free women, so that people cannot talk bad about them, etc. So Khadija radiallahu anha was his number one. First of all, the first one to become Muslim is a woman, Khadija radiallahu anha. The first martyr in Islam is Sumayyah, who's also a woman. So subhanAllah, this religion honored women more than any human being can try to honor them. So he was frightened, so she told him, Allah will never disgrace you. Why? Because number one, you unite uterine relations. So you keep the ties of kinship with your family members. You bear the burden of the weak. You help the weak. You help the poor and the needy. You entertain the guests and endure hardship in the path of truthfulness. As we saw before, the confederacy of Al-Fudul. Al-Fudul. Basically, they joined forces so they can protect truthfulness and give the rights to their people. So she, radiallahu anha, set out with the Prophet ﷺ to her cousin Waraqa bin Nawfal bin Asad bin Abdul Uzza, who had embraced Christianity in the pre-Islamic period. And he used to write the Hebrew scriptures, and he would write from the Injil in Hebrew what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willed for him to write. So he was an old and he was blind. He was old and he was blind, old blind man. Khadija radiallahu anha said, my cousin, listen to your nephew. Waraqa bin Nawfal said, oh my nephew, what did you see? So the Prophet ﷺ told him what happened to him, and Waraqa replied, this is the great Namus, meaning the angel who was entrusted with divine secrets that Allah sent to Musa alayhi salam. So Waraqa bin Nawfal continues, I wish I were younger. I wish I could live up to the time when your people would turn you out. So Muhammad asked, will they drive me out? Waraqa answered, yes, and said, anyone who came with something similar to what you have brought was treated with hostility. And if I should be alive on that day, then I would support you strongly. then I would support you strongly. So here, Waraqa bin Nawfal, from the knowledge that he had, number one, recognized that the Prophet ﷺ was a prophet, okay, and that Jibreel ﷺ is the same person that came to Musa ﷺ before, and number three, that anyone that brought this type of message of truth to his people, he is going to be harmed because of the truth that he brought. And also he said that if I were a younger person, I would have defended you. This is Waraqa bin Nawfal, but he was old and he was blind. Now, Waraqa bin Nawfal died shortly thereafter. He accepted Islam. He accepted that the Prophet ﷺ was a messenger, and there is a hadith, authentic hadith, narrated by Aisha radiallahu anha, that he saw Waraqa bin Nawfal having 2 paradises. So he died as a Muslim, he never prayed, and he never waged jihad. The only thing he did is the deed of the heart. The deed of the heart, which is believing in the Prophet ﷺ, believing in the true message of the Prophet ﷺ. So Waraqa bin Nawfal died as a Muslim. A few days later, Waraqa died and the revelation also subsided. Interruption of the revelation. Ibn Sa'd reported on the authority of Ibn Abbas that the revelation paused for a few days. After careful study, this seems to be most possible. To say that it lasted 3 or 2.5 years is popular, is not correct. So you may read in some places that the revelation stopped for 3 years. That is not correct. Revelation actually only stopped for a few days, because as narrated in the Book of Dreams, Al-Bukhari recorded that the divine inspiration paused for a while, and the Prophet ﷺ became so sad, as we have heard, that he intended several times to throw himself from the tops of high mountains. Every time he went up to the top of a mountain in order to throw himself down, Jibreel ﷺ would appear before him and say, "O Muhammad, you are indeed Allah's messenger in truth." Whereupon his heart would become quiet and he would calm down and return home. So he ﷺ, as we said, when he first saw Jibreel ﷺ, he was afraid, and then he would feel very upset, but Jibreel ﷺ would appear to him and would tell him that you are truly the messenger. Whenever the period of the coming of the revelation needs to become long, he would do as before, but Jibreel ﷺ would appear again before him and say to him what he had said before. Ibn Hajar said that the pause of Allah's revelation was only for a few days. And that was why? So that the Prophet ﷺ would be relieved from the fear he experienced and to make him long for the revelation. So the pause was only for a few days. When the shades of confusion diminished, the flags of truth were raised. Allah's Messenger ﷺ knew for sure that he had become the messenger of the great Lord. He was also certain that what had come to him was no more than the ambassador of inspiration, Jibreel ﷺ. His waiting and longing for the coming of the revelation constituted a good reason for his steadfastness and self-possession on the arrival of Allah's inspiration. Al-Bukhari reported on the authority of Jabir bin Abdullah that he had heard Allah's Messenger ﷺ speak about the period of pause as follows. While I was walking, I heard a voice from the sky. I looked up, and surely enough, it was the same angel who had visited me in the cave of Hira. He was sitting on a chair between the earth and the sky. I was very afraid of him and knelt on the ground. Then I went home saying, "Cover me, cover me." Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the verse where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, the verses, "Ya ayyuhal muddathir, qum fa'anzir, wa rabbaka fakabbir, wa thiyabaka fatahhir, wa rujza fahjur." O you Muhammad, who was enveloped in your garments because he was afraid, arise and warn people, and your Lord do magnify, and your garments purify, and keep away from rijz, the idols. Stay away from the idol worship. Now, after the revelation started coming strongly, frequently, and regularly after that point. Also in the Sahih, the Prophet ﷺ said, "I stayed in Hira for a month. When my stay ended, I descended to hear a call. When I reached the interior of the valley," then he mentioned something to precede us. In other words, when he came down from Hira He heard the call. When he turned around, he saw Jibreel alayhi salam sitting on a chair covering between the heaven and the earth. Conveying and warning. This was the first of his duties. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قُمْ فَأَنذِرْ, arise and warn. So he alayhi salam was to warn the people against the punishment of Allah if they do not revert from their tyranny, deviation and worship of other than Allah and associating others with him, his attributes, his rights, and what he does. Now, we're going to pause here and we're going to take 2 minutes to talk about the noise that's coming from there. We have to understand why Iblis was actually taken out from the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He was not a mushrik. Iblis was not a mushrik, but he was arrogant. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him an order, he would not obey it. He was too arrogant to obey the order. So we Muslims should not be like it. Because if a sheikh is given a lesson and the angels are in this place and then someone is talking on the phone in a place of worship, if this sheikh says, may Allah not bless anything you're doing, his dua is answered. So this person is calling upon himself the wrath of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I'm not sure if the brother does not understand English. If he does not, please do translate to him and tell him that whatever he's doing is haram, because the masjids are not done for worldly talk. And the Prophet ﷺ said, anybody that talks about a worldly matter in the masjid, Allah is not going to put the barakah in it. So you're talking about business in the masjid, Allah is going to take away the business from your barakah. You're talking to your wife, Allah is going to have trouble between you and your wife. Especially if you are, in addition to that, look how many people you're taking their sin. So if this is arrogance, I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to punish him. If it's ignorance, I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to keep him away from this masjid until he learns what benefits him in his religion. If you brothers have any